In the northern Rockies, at the hub of 5 river valleys, lies the city of Missoula, Montana, and the communities of Bonner and Milltown. Roughly 75,000 people live, work, and play in this Clark Fork River corridor. They also share an enormous problem: contaminated sediments that seep into the drinking water and periodically wash down the river and kill fish. These toxic wastes are trapped behind the Milltown Dam, next door to Bonner and Milltown, and just 8 miles upstream from Missoula. For nearly 100 years, the dam has plugged the Clark Fork and Blackfoot rivers. At the turn of the last century, it powered nearby sawmills and helped fuel Butte's massive copper mines. But it also trapped a lot of mining waste.
And Milltown Dam was constructed in 1907, and it got its first big test very shortly thereafter in 1908, when the biggest flood on record came down the Clark Fork. Of course, that moved all of those sediments down the river, deposited them all the way along the river, but of course a lot of them also ended up behind Milltown Dam.
In the flood of 1908, the Milltown Dam was under 14 feet of water. The dam owner had to blow up a portion of the dam to protect the entire structure. In the ice jam of 1996, the dam's owner, Montana Power, was worried the dam wouldn't hold up. It was a close call. Operators were quick to lower the reservoir as a way to put the brakes on the ice and to keep it from striking the dam. That sent contaminated metals over the dam and into the river. It's clear that natural forces could send this reservoir mess downriver.
This reservoir really does remind me of the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, because it appears to be one thing, but if you look more deeply underneath and see what it really is, it's a collection of sediments that cause damage to the groundwater and the river whenever there's high ice flows or high water.
The contaminants are so well hidden, despite being 30 feet thick in places, that no one even knew there was a problem until 1981. That's when health officials discovered arsenic in several of Milltown's drinking wells. They eventually traced the problem to the Milltown Reservoir and Butte's legacy of mining in the headwaters of the Clark Fork River. After scientists made the connection between the poisoned wells and the reservoir, it didn't take them long to realize that arsenic was just the tip of the iceberg at Milltown.
The metals that we're most worried about are cadmium, copper, and zinc. And for aquatic life, we worry about the metals in the sediments when they're resuspended in the water during flood events, during ice scour events, such as we saw in 1996. Those events have resulted in some fish kills and toxicity to fish below the dam.
Because these metals can be extremely dangerous to human health and aquatic life, the EPA declared Milltown Reservoir and hundreds of adjacent acres a toxic waste site under federal Superfund law. Eventually, the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, designated Superfund sites upstream too. The dam itself became the endpoint of a 120-mile Superfund complex, the largest in the country. The real danger at Milltown is that its poisons don't sit still. Arsenic has spread well beyond Milltown Reservoir's boundaries, and there's no telling where it could go next. As for copper and other metals, the only certainty is they, too, will continue to pollute the Clark Fork River.
As long as we have sediments contaminated with arsenic in the reservoir, we will have contamination of the Milltown water supply, and it will not clean itself up.
Well, we always think of a dam as holding back sediments, but in the case of Milltown, the reservoir is really full to capacity with sediment. That means that new sediment that comes down the river is no longer really stored in the river, so it doesn't really hold back sediment anymore.
Flooding on the Clark Fork happens. It's natural, it's expected, it's how rivers work. What is not natural and what is not safe is the presence of tons of toxic waste sitting in the Clark Fork's river bottom right next to an aging dam. To address the dam's structural shortcomings, the federal agency overseeing hydroelectric dams in the United States recently reclassified Milltown as a high hazard and ordered substantial reinforcements to its structure. And leaks were recently discovered. The trouble is, if the reservoir's toxic waste are allowed to continue to plug the river, then Milltown Dam is going to require top-notch maintenance, care, and attention forever.
And it's an old dam. It needs substantial upgrades in order to continue to be safe. And it seems to me that it's lived its useful life, and the best thing to do is to remove it.
Equally troubling, perpetual maintenance won't take care of the dam's fish problems.
After guiding and fishing on the Clark Fork River for the past decade, I'm convinced that there's the single most important thing that we could do to improve the fishery is to remove Milltown Dam that blocks the confluence of the Clark Fork and the Blackfoot. And that's what needs to happen. It needs to happen soon.
Trout populations in the Clark Fork are a fraction of what they should be. Biologists pin the blame on the presence of metals and dams. The dam at Milltown is the first of 4 on the Clark Fork, and it prevents fish from traveling upstream and reaching hundreds of miles of spawning habitat in the Blackfoot, Rock Creek, and Flint Creek.
Another big problem with the reservoir now, just in the last 4 years, is the identification of pike in the reservoir. And the pike are a non-native species to Montana, and these non-native species are eating all the trout, the cutthroats and the bull trout, and the bull trout is an endangered species, so it's very important that we try to correct that problem before we lose that resource.
To make the situation even worse, these fish stack up at the dam during spring runoff, when toxic metals typically spill over the dam. For years, Milltown Dam has been a money loser for its owners. It generates less than 2 megawatts of power, a mere 1/10 of 1% of Montana's needs.
We also know it's more expensive to keep the dam in place and repair it than it is to remove it. So it seems pretty common sense to me that it's going to come out someday. We better figure out how to do it right and get it done.
The surge in interest in dam removal, both nationally and locally, is beginning to produce a growing body of knowledge and expertise about how to do it safely, and how to do it effectively. The Edwards Dam, which was pulled out of the Kennebec River in Maine in 1999, is a useful model for Milltown. It's about the same size as Milltown and also blocked several species of fish. Today, the Kennebec fishery is well on its way again, and towns along the river are experiencing new recreational and business opportunities.
Initially, the city was opposed. The dam represented the economic lifeblood of the city for 100 years. So naturally, there was a sense that it was not a good thing to remove this dam. I think the dam removal was the catalyst which led to some new monies coming in, which led to some new business interests. I think it's all intricately connected.
The one thing that distinguishes dam removal at Milltown from dam removal on the Kennebec is the toxic waste sitting in the reservoir. The waste will have to be removed and safely stored in a repository before any dam dismantling gets underway. Arco, recently purchased by BP Amoco, has the responsibility of paying for the cleanup. It's a big job, but feasible.
From the EPA perspective, we believe it's safe to physically remove the sediments from behind the dam without causing unacceptable degradation of the Clark Fork below the dam.
Cleanup and dam removal is going to cost anywhere from $100 to $150 million, which is going to create all sorts of new jobs and economic benefits in restoring a vital asset to the Missoula community. I think clean water, high-paying jobs would make it just obviously a win-win situation for the whole community.
The possibility of waste removal and dam removal at the Milltown Superfund site is gaining both public attention and public support. The Superfund process is approaching decision time. A dam licensing determination is around the corner, and communities both upstream and down are increasingly turning towards bold approaches to lingering water quality problems. This region played a vitally important role in history. It gave the world copper, but it also heaped a lot of abuse on the Clark Fork River Basin. Now we have the chance to revitalize our river, to take a positive step to make amends. By voicing support for sediment and dam removal, you can help make this a century of restoration.
Hi, my name is Matt Clifford. I'm the Conservation Director for the Clark Fork Coalition. And if you don't know who we are, we're a Missoula-based nonprofit group devoted to protecting water quality in the Clark Fork River. That's what we do. As you can gather from the video that you just saw, we feel pretty strongly that Milltown Dam ought to come out and the sediments ought to be cleaned up in the river behind the dam. As you could probably also guess pretty strongly from the video, it's a very complicated issue, and there's a lot of different scientific, legal, and technical questions that are involved, and so it's a real challenge to try to explain all these various things to people. What I did last month is I gave a presentation to a meeting of Society of Friends here in Missoula, at which I gave a brief explanation of all the different reasons why we think Milltown Dam ought to come out, and also answered a number of questions that inevitably people have about different aspects of that, and addressed a number of those at that meeting. And what we're going to do next here is show a tape that was made of that presentation, at which I think we tried to address a number of the more common questions that people have, and provided as much information we could about the different scientific and engineering reasons why the dam ought to come out. Because when you look at all the different harms the dam does to the river, it really is, it starts to add up, and you have to understand that the main factor affecting the river right now in this Missoula area, suppressing the fish populations, is Milltown Dam. And the more we learn about the dam, the more that appears to be the case. So, and again, it's very highly feasible to take the dam out. We now know from engineering studies that the dam can be removed, the sediments can be removed given existing technology, and the benefits of doing that far outweigh the costs. So we're going to play this video now explaining the various reasons we think that's the case. And if this doesn't answer any questions you have, if you have something you still want to know, please feel free anytime to give us a call. We like to talk about this, and our job is to provide information to people and to educate the public. You can reach us anytime at 542-0539. Feel free to ask for me. Again, it's Matt Clifford, and we'd love to talk to you about it. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and play the video.
After we do the introduction, there will be a presentation by Matt, excuse me, from Arco. It's been a busy day. And we'll be talking about the Milltown Dam. I do know that. So I guess we'll go around to a quick introduction. I've already introduced myself. There is one, if anybody has anything really important, really short to say, welcome to share it with all of us. There's just one thing that was passed on today. I thought it was very timely. I think most of you already heard it. In Germany, the Nazis first came for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time, there was no one left speaking for me. This was by a little quote by Reverend Niemöller, a German Lutheran pastor, who was arrested by the Gestapo and sent to Dachau in 1938, was freed by the Allied forces in 1945.
My name is Mark Anderlick.
Janet Cole.
Richard Block.
Elizabeth Collins. Patricia Hogan. Christoph Olson. Jess Meyer. Kay Hurst.
Michael Santana.
Matt Clifford.
Carol Valley.
David Max.
Okay, that's all of us.
Am I on? Okay. Hi, I'm Matt Clifford. I'm the Conservation Director of the Clark Fork Coalition. We're a non-profit. We're about 15 years old, based here in Missoula. And we are devoted to protecting water quality in the Clark Fork River. That's our mission. We formed originally around issues related to the stone container mill back in the 1980s, and we wanted to expand, and also the various Superfund sites along the Clark Fork River. And what I want to do tonight is kind of talk about 2 years ago, after watchdogging the Superfund cleanups on the Clark Fork for a long time, including Milltown Reservoir, we came to the decision after a lot of thought that we supported actually removing the toxic sediments sitting behind Milltown Dam and removing the dam to clean up that site once and for all. And I kind of want to talk about the various reasons we think that removing the dam and this pollution would be a great thing, not only for Clark Fork and Blackfoot Rivers, but for this community as well. What I want to start off by doing is we have this kind of slightly video that was produced, spent a bunch of money on it, it's TV. And I'd like to kind of explain, to get an overview of the problems with the dam. I'd like to start off with watching this, about 10 minutes long. And let's I want to go into a little bit more detail about some of the specific problems with the dam and why they're bad for the river and why removal is the solution for it. Then I want to say at least 10 minutes at the end for questions. I find that it's a big thing that we're proposing, and I have a lot of questions about it. I'd like to address those. So if I need to help get this going, I hope someone will give it to me. Yeah, power button maybe. Yeah. Does everybody know where Milltown Reservoir is? I mean, it's basically a wide spot in the river as you go out to past the, go out on the interstate towards the butte. It's just past the exit ramp at Bonner there. And, if you blink and miss it, it's basically a little reservoir going up a little bit.
In the northern Rockies, at the hub of 5 river valleys, lies the city of Missoula, Montana, and the communities of Bonner and Milltown. Roughly 75,000 people live, work, and play in this Clark Fork River corridor. They also share an enormous problem: contaminated sediments that seep into the drinking water and periodically wash down the river and kill fish. These types of waste are trapped behind the Milltown Dam, next door to Bonner and Milltown, and just 8 miles upstream from Missoula. For nearly 100 years, the dam has plugged the Clark Fork and Blackfoot rivers. At the turn of the last century, it powered nearby sawmills and helped fuel Butte's massive copper mines. But it also trapped a lot of mining waste.
And Milltown Dam was constructed in 1907, and it got its first big test very shortly thereafter in 1908, when the biggest flood on record came down the Clark Fork. Of course, that moved all of those sediments down the river, deposited them all the way along the river, but of course a lot of them also ended up behind Milltown Dam.
In the flood of 1908, the Milltown Dam was under 14 feet of water. The dam owner had to blow up a portion of the dam to protect the entire structure. In the ice jam of 1996, the dam's owner, Montana Power, was worried the dam wouldn't hold up. It was a close call. Operators were quick to lower the reservoir as a way to put the brakes on the ice and to keep it from striking the dam. That sent contaminated metals over the dam and into the river. It's clear that natural forces could send this reservoir mess downriver.
This reservoir really does remind me of the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, because it appears to be one thing, but if you look more deeply underneath and see what it really is, it's a collection of sediments that cause damage to the groundwater and the river whenever there's high ice flows or high water.
The contaminants are so well hidden, despite being 30 feet thick in places, that no one even knew there was a problem until 1981. That's when health officials discovered arsenic in several of Milltown's drinking wells. They eventually traced the problem to the Milltown Reservoir and Butte's legacy of mining the headwaters of the Clark Fork River. After scientists made the connection between the poisoned wells and the reservoir, it didn't take them long to realize that arsenic was just the tip of the iceberg in Milltown.
The metals that we're most worried about are cadmium, copper, and zinc. And for aquatic life, we worry about the metals in the sediments when they're resuspended in the water during flood events, during ice scour events, such as we saw in 1996. Those events have resulted in some fish kills and toxicity to fish below the dam.
Because these metals can be extremely dangerous to human health and aquatic life, the EPA declared Milltown Reservoir and hundreds of adjacent acres a toxic waste site under federal Superfund law. Eventually, the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, designated Superfund sites upstream too. The dam itself became the endpoint of a 120-mile Superfund complex, the largest in the country. The real danger in Milltown is that its poisons don't sit still. Arsenic has spread well beyond Milltown Reservoir's boundaries, and there's no telling where it could go next. As for copper and other metals, the only certainty is they too will continue to pollute the Clark Fork River.
As long as we have sediments contaminated with arsenic in the reservoir, we will have contamination of Milltown water supply, and it will not clean itself up.
Well, we always think of the dam as holding back sediments, but in the case of Milltown, the reservoir is really full to capacity with sediment. That means that new sediment that comes down the river is no longer really stored in the river, so it doesn't really hold back sediment anymore.
Flooding on the Clark Fork happens. It's natural, it's expected, it's how rivers work. What is not natural and what is not safe is the presence of tons of toxic waste sitting in the Clark Fork's river bottom right next to an aging dam. To address the dam's structural shortcomings, the federal agency overseeing hydroelectric dams in the United States recently reclassified Milltown as a high hazard and ordered substantial reinforcements to its structure. And leaks were recently discovered. The trouble is, if the reservoir's toxic waste are allowed to continue to flood the river, then Milltown Dam is going to require top-notch maintenance, care, and attention forever.
And it's an old dam. It needs substantial upgrades in order to continue to be safe. And it seems to me that it's lived its useful life, and the best thing to do is to renew it.
Equally troubling, perpetual maintenance won't take care of the dam's fish problems.
After guiding and fishing on the Clark Fork River for the past decade, I'm convinced that there's the single most important thing that we can do to improve the fishery is to remove Milltown Dam that blocks the confluence of the Clark Fork and Blackfoot. And that's what needs to happen. It needs to happen soon.
Trout populations in the Clark Fork are a fraction of what they should be. Biologists pin the blame on the presence of metals and dams. The dam at Milltown is the first of four on the Clark Fork. It prevents fish from traveling upstream and reaching hundreds of miles of spawning habitat in the Blackfoot, Rock Creek, and Flint Creek.
Another big problem with the reservoir now, just in the last 4 years, is the identification of pike in the reservoir. And the pike are a non-native species to Montana, and these non-native species are eating all the trout, the cutthroats and the bull trout. The bull trout is an endangered species, so it's very important that we try to correct that problem before we lose that resource.
To make the situation even worse, these fish stack up at the dam during spring runoff, when toxic metals typically spill over the dam. For years, Milltown Dam has been a money loser for its owners. It generates less than 2 megawatts of power, a mere 1/10 of 1% of Montana's needs.
We also know it's more expensive to keep the dam in place and repair it than it is to remove it. So it seems pretty common sense to me that it's going to come out someday. We better figure out how to do it right and get it done.
The surge in interest in dam removal, both nationally and locally, is beginning to produce a growing body of knowledge and expertise about how to do it safely, and how to do it effectively. The Edwards Dam, which was pulled out of the Kennebec River in Maine in 1999, is a useful model for Milltown. It's about the same size as Milltown and also blocked several species of fish. Today, the Kennebec fishery is well on its way again, and towns along the experiencing new recreational and business opportunities.
Initially, the city was opposed. The dam represented the economic lifeblood of the city for 100 years. So naturally, there was a sense that it was not a good thing to remove this dam. I think the dam removal was the catalyst which led to some new monies coming in, which led to some new business interests. I think it's all intricately connected.
The one thing that distinguishes dam removal at Milltown from dam removal on McKennedy is the toxic waste sitting in the reservoir. The waste will have to be removed and safely stored in a repository before any dam dismantling gets underway. Arco, recently purchased by DC Arco, has the responsibility of paying for the cleanup. It's a big job, but feasible. From the EPA perspective, we believe it is safe to physically remove the sediments from behind the dam without causing unacceptable degradation of the hard part below the dam.
Cleaning up the dam removal is going to cost anywhere from $100 to $150 million, which is going to create all sorts of new jobs and economic benefits in restoring a vital asset to Missoula community. I think clean water, high-paying jobs would make it just obviously a win-win situation for the whole community.
The possibility of waste removal and dam removal at the Milltown Superfund site is gaining both public attention and public support. The Superfund process is approaching decision. Dam licensing determination is around the corner, and communities both upstream and down are increasingly turning towards bold approaches to lingering water quality problems. This region played a vitally important role in history. It gave the world copper. But it also heaped a lot of abuse on the Clark Fork River Basin. Now we have the chance to revitalize the river, to take a positive step, to make amends. By voicing support for sediment and dam removal, you can help make this a century of restoration.
Okay. Now let's I want to pick up, just to kind of summarize what the video is saying, and kind of make this clear. There's kind of three basic problems that this dam is causing in Milltown. It's actually four problems, but just to be clear, we've got all this toxic, basically heavy metals laden sediment that's washed down from the mining operations of the butte over the years, sitting in the reservoir here. And that's causing, the water leaching down through there and causing a plume of arsenic in the groundwater, which extends down here below the town of Bonner and Milltown, beneath the reservoir. And that's contaminating this aquifer. A number of wells have had to be closed just because the water is unsafe to drink. Arsenic, as you probably heard, is a powerful carcinogen. Currently, the EPA has just recently announced, finally, after 20 or 30 years of study, they're going to lower the standard from 50 parts per billion down to 10. One thing I want to impress upon people is that 10 parts per billion standard does not mean that it's safe to drink water with 10 parts per billion of arsenic in it. That's a compromise. EPA has said that they cannot determine the safe level of arsenic, but if it were up to them in a perfect world, they'd make the standard 0. Because they don't know what the safe level of arsenic is. But because it's very expensive to treat for arsenic, they reached a compromise at 10 parts per billion. But if you've got 10 parts per billion of arsenic in your water, my advice to you is don't drink. In Missoula, that's not the case. But some of these wells in Milltown do have that much. And probably a couple of additional wells are going to have to be closed now if the new standard has been adopted. So that's one problem, is the arsenic in the groundwater. A second problem is related to surface water. The problem for people is the problem related to fish, which is that a lot of the sediments, particularly in this part of the reservoir, contain high levels of copper and zinc. And when for a long time, people thought that wasn't really a problem, that they kind of sat there and, why stir them up? Let's leave them alone. They're in the reservoir and stable. Well, we've learned in recent years, since the ice jam in '96, that's just not the case. Sometimes those things wash in very high concentrations over the dam, and those are very lethal to fish. In 1996, we had that huge fish kill in February '96, where we had something like 40 times the state water quality standards for copper over the dam. So that's a huge problem. And the third set of problems is also a fisheries problem, and that's just the problem caused just by the dam being here, because the sand. There's no fish passage facilities whatsoever. And the native fish, particularly bull trout, well, actually bull and cutthroat trout, which are the two native trout species in these rivers, are naturally adapted. Before white people came here and started building things like this, they are adapted to use these, to travel huge distances up and down this river system. They would spend some time down here in the main stem, and then they would migrate sometimes over 100 miles up the very small tributaries to spawn. That's the natural life history. They've been unable to do that for 100 years since the dam has been here, and that's really suppressing fish populations in these rivers. So there's kind of the three, in a nutshell, the three main problems caused by the dam. There's kind of a fourth problem I mentioned too, and that's this idea of, as long as we have a dam here, and as long as a river's job, and the river doesn't want obstructions in it, over time we're going to try to move the obstruction. And again, as long as the dam is a constant battle to keep it in place, there's always a chance the dam will fail. And I don't want to overplay this, because I'm not out here trying to tell people the Milltown Dam is going to fail tomorrow, because I don't think it's terribly likely. On the other hand, over time, if you look at the last 100 years or so, the history is pretty constant. Montana Power and its predecessors have constantly been having to shore this dam up every 10 or 20 years or so, constant repairs. Just last month, we saw the most recent one. The dam says last year sprung some pretty significant leaks that had to be fixed last year. And if you want to think, if you want to know what it's going to be like for the next couple hundred years, if we leave the dam in place, just look at the past. We're going to be shoring it up over and over again. It's been completely overhauled at least twice in its history, and I would expect that pattern to continue. So basically, we pass the problem along to our kids and our kids' kids. So I think that's a significant problem also. So as far as what to do about these problems, we feel pretty strongly that it's almost stating obvious, but the thing that you want to do if you can is get rid of this stuff once and for all, get it out of the river. And the way that would be done, the feasibility study is just being finished up now to demonstrate that it's feasible, is hydraulic dredging, that we talked about. And the option that we support would be not to remove all 6.6 million yards in the reservoir, because we think that would be overkill. According to the feasibility study, the best approach would be to remove the sediments in the lower reservoir. That's from here, what's called the Duck Bridge, it's the old railroad bridge, down to the dam, because these are the most toxic sediments there, the most concentrated sediments, and the ones that are causing the arsenic plume, and the ones that tend to wash over and kill fish downstream. So what would happen, real briefly, is they would lower the water level as much as possible using the dam here, and that would expose about half of these sediments, and they could be removed in the dry with conventional earth moving equipment, which is a better way, which is a good way to do it because it doesn't have risk of downstream impacts from straight sediment itself. At that point, the remaining 50% would be dredged using what was in the video, shown in the video, which is a cutter head suction dredge, it's called. It's got a rotating head on it that breaks loose the sediment, basically vacuums it up. Would be vacuumed most likely into a pipeline. There's a site about 3.5 miles up here near Truro, which would be a good site for a repository, where they place and get them out of the river into a safe place where they'll be stable. The total cost of that project, well, let me just finish up. At that point, you can't just walk away from it, because if you do, the river won't erode up as it finds its own bed. It'll be head cutting, it'll threaten the interstate bridges and the sediments up here. So what happens, you have to place some kind of drop structures in the river to control erosion. The Army Corps of Engineers said, well, that's fine, we'll design some concrete chutes, we'll just put them in. That's kind of the way they do things over there. We'll just put them in the river and, like these concrete chutes, everything will be fine. And Missoula County came along and said, well, that's a really dumb idea. I mean, that's going to be a hazard to people, and it's going to be ugly. Why do that? And you put a series of natural boulders in there and create a series of whitewater drops, and, have a resource that people could actually use. So you may have heard about the quote-unquote whitewater park. But that's the genesis of that idea. It's not to create a whitewater park here. It's basically to control erosion and have a benefit at the same time. The total cost of the project, not including that last part, the whitewater park, is estimated at $120 million. Okay, which seems like a lot of money. You got to understand that the company responsible for this, Arco, was acquired by BP Amoco, and their total profits last year were $14 billion. Okay, so the bottom line is we really think they can afford it. The other thing, of course, is that they wouldn't have to spend all that $120 billion in 1 year. It's spread out over time, which lessens the blow as well. But they've got the benefit from mining for all these years, and we think it's entirely within reason to ask them to pay that $20 and clean it up. I want to mention briefly what Arco is proposing to do. They don't want to spend $120 million. What they want to do is upgrade the dam in a way that they think is going to solve this problem during ice jams and help control sediment release during ice jams. So what they would basically do is take the existing spillway of the dam, which currently has a system of wooden flashboards to control the level of the reservoir. They would take that off and replace it with what's called a rubber dam. If you want to get fancy and net crest, but the manufacturer, which is Bridgestone Firestone, calls it a rubber dam, so that's all. It's basically a big cylinder that goes across here, and you can control the water level by inflating the tube or deflating it, and as you deflate it setting, you can spill water over the top. They think that that's going to preclude the need during ice jams. It'll help pass ice, and they only have to draw the reservoir down for ice jams, and keep it at full pool. That's going to keep the copper levels from getting too high in the river. I haven't quite seen how that's going to happen. I think it's pretty much agreed that an event the size of 1996, it doesn't matter what you've got across the top of this dam, the thing's going to be in danger and the owner's going to need to draw it down to try to protect it. So I'm not going to necessarily do anything at all about that scale of ice jam. Arco thinks that ice jams at that scale are pretty rare, but he got some pictures in 1974 that show a very, very similar event, 20 years earlier. So a lot of us are not going to think that's a problem, that's going to help things. But the other thing you know about rubber dams is that for this application, it's really an untested technology. Rubber dams have been around in a big way for maybe 20 years or so around the world. And they fail from time to time. We know at least 4 rubber dam failures we were able to uncover due to various things of abrasion from debris. One was vandalism in Vermont, manufacturing defect, and once in Australia, rubber dam failed simply because of software. These things there's a computer that controls the pressure of these things, and the computer crashed. Things you might not think of right away, but when the computer crashed, the dam just deflated suddenly. Well, in a lot of places, that's not that big a deal. You get to pull some water downstream, it's annoying, a little bit dangerous, but it's not that big a deal. But if that would have happened here, if you lower this reservoir suddenly, what we know is you get a flush of toxic metals downstream. So using a rubber dam to try to contain toxic sediments is really an unproven idea. This would be the first place, as far as we can tell, it's ever been attempted. And I think it would introduce a substantial new risk here that we don't have right now. I think that's a pretty serious thing. So either way, whether you go with dredging or go with the rubber dam, it's unproven technology, as an important point to me. I should mention also the difference between the rubber dam option and basically the other operation dam is about $20 million. So the difference between the two is about $100 million. BP/Arco obviously does not want to spend another $100 million. Corporations don't do that. They don't just give out money. They're always trying to keep their costs as low as possible. So what we've seen so far, I think we'll see a lot more of, is a large-scale campaign to try to convince people that dredging is this huge evil that's going to kill the river. In case you think that Arco or BP suddenly is, the guardian of the Clark Fork River. I mean, I'm not real convinced myself, but that's what we are being asked to believe. Something along the same lines as we saw in New York over the last couple of years, so that GE had done, because they're trying to avoid having to dredge the Hudson River. And the EPA finally has ordered them to dredge the Hudson, despite spending something like $60 million to try to convince people that it would be environmentally damaging to clean up the pollution. Seeing the same thing here, which we're being told that it's going to be environmentally damaging to clean up the reservoir. The bottom line is, according to the work being done by the Army Corps of Engineers, who are not exactly environmentalists, the downstream impacts from dredging have been very much overblown by Arco. And we can talk about that more, but in a nutshell, compared to what we saw in 1996 with the ice jam, compared to the damage that this dam does to the fishery just by being here and the groundwater, the impact of dredging, which would be temporary, 7 years at most, just don't even hold a candle to that. So, I mean, to me, it's not even an argument, it's not even a close call. I mean, when you dredge, you get some short-term impacts. When you're done, you're done. And then the river, it's a much better thing for the river. That's what we think, that's what the Fish and Wildlife Service thinks, that's what the State Fish and Game Department thinks, that's what the State Department of Environmental Quality thinks. So, that argument, I think, just doesn't hold water. So what I want to do now is a lot of things we could talk about. I mean, there's, the construction aspect of this is a lot of jobs for the economy. There's the power equation that you talked a little bit about. A lot of things to talk about. But I'd like to throw it open to questions. I'm really kind of curious what people's main concerns are about this, and I'd just like to hear what people are thinking. Yeah?
Did I understand you to say that not only the rubber dam is an untried technology, but dredging is an untried technology?
I won't say untried technology. Dredging has been, of sediments is something that's been done increasingly in the last 10 years, extensively in the Great Lakes region. Over the Great Lakes, it's a little different. It's primarily PCBs that are being dredged, which are a little different in some ways. But the bottom line is there's been a lot of improvements in technology, a lot of experience with controlling the main problem you get with dredging, which is the stirring of sediments and having them wash downstream. So I think it's when I say new, I mean it's something that's been done in a big way for maybe 10 years. Same with rubber dams, so for 10 years or so. So either way, it's technology that we're gaining experience with, but it's relatively new.
My understanding is that they're able to use silk curtains to contain.
That's a good point. What they do is they set up, you know, when you have a dredge operating there. It's basically a big vacuum cleaner mounted on the barge, and I don't know how to say it better than that. You put a U-shaped layer of silk curtains around it. It sets a little cell. That'll catch a great deal of suspended sediment. The Arco core analysis that I was talking about, which predicted that the downstream impacts wouldn't be as severe as was feared. To be conservative, they assumed that we wouldn't even use silk curtains. So when you use silk curtains on there, the impacts are even less. But I don't want to downplay the impact. There is some potential during that 7-year period. For a short period of time, we might see some high levels of copper down here. I don't want to sit with soft pedal that. But again, compared to what we have already with the dam in place, it's not nearly as much damage. Yeah.
And you said that they would deposit the dredge stuff at Tura and it would be stabler. What would prevent it from leaching at Tura as well?
Great question. Let's go into that. What would be done is that the sediments would put in basically a repository, which sounds like a big fancy word, but it basically, for this particular material, by law, it would have to be stored in something along the line, built to the same standards as the BFI landfill. And the reason for that is because this stuff, well, it's very, very dangerous when it's in the middle of the river. I mean, if you were to pick a place for, the worst possible place to possibly put this stuff, it would be the confluence of the 2 biggest rivers in this region, if you want to think. In the middle of the river, it's dangerous stuff. When you get out of the river, out of that aquatic environment, it's not a high enough concentration, for example, to be classified legally as toxic waste. It's simply not that concentrated. Out of the river, in a dry environment, it's relatively stable. If you put it in a landfill with a clay liner and a cap and a leachate collection system, is properly engineered, there's no reason to think it's particularly going to go anyplace any more than there's, the BFI landfill is considered a hazard. I mean, at that point, it's stable. So you got to compare that to where it is now, which is basically an unregulated, unlined hazardous waste dump in the middle of the river. So the risks, I mean, I would say the risks are zero, but they're infinitely less than where the stuff is located now.
What's the estimated amount of acreage it would take for that?
For the landfill?
For the dry landfill.
Good question. It's a couple hundred. I don't want to go quote me on that. Somewhere, I think it's around 200 acres is the site they're considering. And basically what it's going to amount to when they're done is a big pile of dirt with a lot of stuff growing on the revegetated top of it. So it won't look like, it's not going to be like a low canal where you don't live next to it. It's a big top of it.
What's the decision-making process? Who's the decision-maker in this?
Should go into that because the main decision maker is EPA because it's a Superfund site and EPA is in charge of figuring out what responsible company has to do to clean up the Superfund site. It's been studied for something like the last 20 years since 1981. We're just now getting to the final stages where they're identifying the problems with the site and they're actually looking at ways to clean it up. And it keeps getting postponed, but right now the best we can guess is that EPA is going to announce some kind of deferred alternative for cleanup sometime next spring, March, April. And make a final decision towards the end of next year. So that's the EPA. Also, it's kind of a unique site in the way that it's a Superfund site here because of toxic waste, but the dam is also, is a hydropower facility. It's regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So it's it's the only Superfund site that's also a FERC regulated facility. And the FERC process is also going on. Dams get licenses for 30 years typically. And the license on this one was originally set to expire in the late 80s, and what FERC has been doing is extending it every year. They keep saying, well, as soon as EPA makes up their mind what to do, then we'll decide whether or not to relicense the dam. And so that's been going on for a time. So FERC has a role in the process also. One of the things we're trying to do is get FERC and EPA to work together on the site to make the decision. So far, FERC has not wanted to do that, but we're going to continue to pressure them to get involved as well. Because FERC has jurisdiction over the fish issues, we're talking about fish catches, things like that. Interesting enough, EPA don't want to touch that stuff. They just want to talk about toxic metals because that's their area of expertise. So we think it's important for both agencies to bring their piece of the puzzle in. And when you look at the whole case, the toxic metals and the fish passage impacts, we think the case is just absolutely clear. The dam basically doesn't do anything. I mean, why would anyone want to keep this dam other than, admittedly, Arco, which is the party who process of cleaning it up? I mean, they want to hang on to this dam because it's a great way to keep this, kind of, not a great way, but it's a way for them to keep this toxic waste relatively stable and not have to clean it up. But that's the only possible benefit, I think, that you get from this dam. It doesn't produce much in the way of power, flood control, and like that. Yeah.
I was at that meeting that y'all had at, out there at Bonner, pie and coffee thing. And I was really astonished at how many people have this nostalgic attachment and they want it for that reason.
Yeah.
The residents. I think that's a big problem.
Well, it is out there. I think people, they kind of know, they know what they have now. They can look out there and the reservoir's always been there and they kind of don't, people don't like change typically. They've got the nostalgia for them. They can see the way it is now and they kind of want it to stay the way it is and not have anything change. But I think when you have something like this, the question really is, I understand their feelings, but this dam affects so many other people. I mean, it affects these rivers for, 100 miles up and downstream of the fish population. Missoula is a huge, there's a city down below here, 5 miles downstream, there's all this toxic waste sitting behind an aging dam, and so people feel threatened down there. So at some point you have to do a balancing and say, we understand you like the reservoir, but we just can't, there's other dangers, there's dangers here, it's affecting other people, and we just can't hang on to it just because people like it. The other thing people have to realize is that the dam is not going to stay the way it is. People in Milltown, a lot of them think it's just going to stay the way it is forever, and that's not going to happen even if the dam was left in place. Because as part of the FERC upgrades, this dam is going to FERC is going to order that the dam be stabilized to protect against the biggest flood that might occur in the station. And in order to do that, they're going to have to build some kind of a massive structure here. Right now, the preferred alternative is to build a 30-foot high berm from just around the powerhouse here over to the interstate highway, completely over the top of the existing park, the recreational facilities where the dam are, basically an eyesore. And it's not going to be the same place that it is now. And I think a lot of people in Milltown and Bonner haven't got that message yet. Yeah.
Let's see, since we're a political group, what the politics of this are and how it might fit into the 2002 elections.
The politics of this are as follows. If you look locally, there's a very, very broad-based, bipartisan group of people that would like to get rid of this dam. And that includes Barbara Evans, our local Republican County Commissioner, all 3 county commissioners, but notably including Barbara Evans, who I've got to say has been one of the staunchest advocates of dam removal. I mean, she's really been good on this. Whatever else, she's been great. And I really appreciate that. I really like working with her. The other day, I talked to a group of legislators out at the dam, including Republican Dale Malum and some others. So it's definitely, there's nothing particularly partisan about this. I mean, the dam doesn't make sense. It's pollution that really ought to be cleaned up, and people of all political persuasions can see that. Also, I should mention briefly that it's a $120 million construction project, and I just would make the point that if somebody proposing to build a dam here for $120 million, we'd be hearing all about a great thing it would be for the economy, fantastic, and nobody would look down and knows that $120 million is a construction job. So all we're asking is that this dam be held to the same standard, dam removal as a dam construction project or a mine or something like that. I think a lot of people, the AFL-CIO endorses this as well. With the new leadership, they've signed on board and endorsed this project. So there's a lot of reasons that people in both parties get behind this. Politically, at the state level, a very important factor, EPA has made it clear they're going to put a lot of deference in when Governor Marks thinks of this. I know a lot of people at DEQ at the state that can see the writing on the wall and can see the merits of removing this dam. I don't know what the governor thinks of this. There's been some cause for concern. I mean, you've probably seen in the paper that there's been suggestions about this land dealer at Arco, and she's a personal friend of Sandy Stash, which is the environmental manager for Arco. And I don't know how that's going to play out. But a lot of people are concerned that she might not be objective about this. And I think to be fair, I think it's a simple matter. There is certainly the appearance of a conflict of interest there. And it's something we're worried about. We think that it really objectively impedes the governor's ability to make a fair decision on this, or at least a person, a reasonable person could worry about that. So we don't know where she's going to come down, but politically that's going to be a really big factor is what the governor thinks.
And since it's a federal site, how does Weber and Caucus come together? Do they have any influence? Or?
Well, yes. I mean, obviously, the Senator Burns caucus and Representative Reber, I mean, they're quite influential. And we've been in contact with all three of them and working with them. And we hope that they'll come out and support it down as well.
Have they taken a position?
I mean, I honestly, we've had a lot of discussions with their staff, and I'm going to back out on that one because I don't know what people have said formally or informally. We've had some encouraging conversations with their staff. Senator Baucus, in particular, I'm hoping will advocate for removal. Whether he's come out and publicly said that or not, I don't want to step in hot water here, so I'm going to defer on that. But we've had some good conversations with the staff.
Can you pressure them being an election year? Important issue locally?
Can we pressure? Yes. I think the message we're really trying to get across to, to all these folks is, I really think, if you ask me, I think this is going to happen. We're building substantial momentum here. We've got something over 5,000 comments with the EPA supporting dam removal. The economics are there. Everything, it just makes sense. I mean, we have a dam that doesn't do anything, and we can get a huge benefit by getting rid of it. I really think we're going to get this done. What I'm really hoping is that people will get on board and help try to make this happen and try to make it as good as possible and get some funding for the site so that after this dam is removed, we've got, we can develop it into something, the Whitewater Park, and have some asset. This can really be a great thing for the community. And I just think most politicians, when they see their, they see that kind of thing, they're going to want to get on board. And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, Carol had a question. Well, I was going to comment about the comparison with Libby. Worked a little bit on Libby, actually. And actually, I think the target is more the governor rather than the congressional delegation. Because the EPA has said explicitly that they've only had one exception to this rule, that they would go with how the governor goes on these kinds of Superfund issues. With Libby, there was a lot of, it was alleged, there was a lot of things going on in Libby about the issue, but it was alleged that, the governor, no one could figure out why she's dragging her feet on that. And partly it may have to do with some kind of personal business connections as well, which never was as made as explicit as it maybe is in this case. But she was definitely subject to a lot of political pressure and finally came around reluctantly, even though a lot of Republicans were wondering, well, what the hell is she doing? I mean, they couldn't understand her position. Even Conrad Burns' staff couldn't figure that out. They were thinking that she was like off the wall. So I think that pressuring her is probably a real critical, and she is movable on that if she gets enough, and it sounds like there's all kinds of folks. And it's somewhat similar to Libby. I mean, I see the same thing happening. This will happen. Sure. She is
their view of the science.
One more question.
Well, I guess my inclination is also to remove the dam, but there's a piece of your presentation that I really don't feel assured about, and that is Torah. I heard you in your presentation using two phrases that make me really concerned. One is repository, which I associate with government greenwashing. It's a dump, basically, a repository, and the other was BFI. And it just seems, that's a massive amount of toxic materials, and I heard you say it'll be stable, and then I heard you describe a pretty standard BFI landfill, which...
It's a RCRA landfill. Solid waste landfill,
yeah. I guess that's the only piece where I'd like to know, what percentage of all the money that will be generated in work is dedicated to Torah, because I guess I'm just not assured that an adequate way of containing this, that we're not just transferring a massive, I can't believe that it's really going to be stable, and that I'm not a scientist, but that amount of arsenic, that volume with just a clay cover and some kind of liner is not going to cause problems. And so I just hope that there's a significant portion of that money is going to be dedicated to.
The cost of constructing a landfill, which I was looking at this morning, is somewhere around $20 million. I mean, it's not a cheap, it's actually one of the major costs of the project. And they're going to build it right. And there's regulators that make sure they do that, they do it for any. The thing I can't impress upon you enough is, I mean, I hear everything he's saying, I agree with it, but you have to compare it to everything you say about leaking and getting up. You got to look at where it is now.
Well, I agree.
And they say, yeah, they say, you know, who wants this in their backyard? And that's kind of the argument that Arco is using. And the obvious answer to that is like stupid. Where is it right now? Right. You know, it's in our backyard.
There's a question about that, but is there any proven dump site for anything toxic that hasn't also leached and contaminated the area that it goes to? I mean, can anybody give me one example of an effective place where it hasn't really affected the environment where it gets moved to?
Well, I mean, it's a question. There's a lot of landfills around the country, I think, you'll find that haven't had problems. That doesn't mean, I mean, a devil's advocate would say, well, yeah, that's after 10 years, but it'll happen in 100 years. And I think all you can say is that it's going to be a lot better off there with a liner than it's going to be. I mean, right now, it's just sitting on top of cobbles, leaching directly into the groundwater. The other thing I got to mention real fast here, I'll let you move on, but that one option is tour. Another option, which costs an extra $20 or $30 million, would be to put the stuff on rail cars or a railroad going right past it, and taking it up to the Opportunity Ponds near Anaconda. Now, the Opportunity Ponds is not a repository. What it is, it's a large area. Pond is a misnomer. It's actually dry and plain now. But it's a place that already has about 200 million yards of more contaminated material than this. And so the idea being that if you put another 4 or 5 million yards in there, you know, it's online, but on the other hand, it's not going to make it any worse. In fact, it's actually going to improve the average quality of what's up there. And that's another option that would not involve those kind of risks that also is being looked at. And maybe the option, a lot of people think that just for the reasons you mentioned, that that's the best option. We look at the slurry pipelines, it's more cost effective. You know, we're saving Arco an extra $20 million or so. But I mean, maybe ultimately that's not what people decide to do. But I hear what you're saying.
All right, well, thanks.
Well, thanks very much for having me. If anyone, you know, we're easy to find. If anyone wants to talk about it or has any more questions, please give us a call. Clark Fork Coalition, we're in the book. And thanks a lot. Thanks.